right, we've come to the top voice segment of the show. Prime Minister Modi wrapped up his two-nation tour of Singapore and Brunei, picking up from the momentum in his first term. Let's get in the first top voice on the show, Professor Kanti Bajpai, who's the Bilmer Professor of Asian Studies at the National Institute of Singapore, to talk more about the impact of India's Act East policy and India's role as far as the South China Sea is concerned. Professor Bajpai, I appreciate you speaking to me on India's sense. I want to ask you a first question, which is the evolution of India's Act East policy. How do you see that transforming since the early days of Look East?
Well, I think it's interesting that these four countries, Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, and now Singapore, have been at the forefront of what Mr. Modi's been doing in the last few days. Because really, in a sense, over the last 2 or 3 years, most of Mr. Modi's second term, Southeast Asia didn't feature very high. In his first term, he was here a lot. And I think he came to Singapore at least twice, if not 3 times in his first term. He went to other countries in the region. But in the second term, it's been very noticeable that Southeast Asia has not really been on his map, or even any of the other very senior ministers, although Jaishankar was here a couple of times as well. So I think this is significant because he himself is at the forefront of these visits and handshakes, and it signals, I think, a renewed interest in New Delhi in the Act East policy. So I think that's welcome because, as I said, the last 4 or 5 years, India lost interest, I think, in the region to quite a perceptible extent. And I think the region lost interest in India as well.
And do you see India being able to really counter China, position itself as a counter to China in the South China Sea?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the dragon in the room in all these meetings is China. So none of India's interlocutors here, nor India itself, will put the China factor up front because it's very uncomfortable, both for New Delhi and for these countries. But clearly, I mean, that's the largest strategic backdrop to the Act East policy, and before that, the Look East policy. So I think Malaysia probably is the friendliest to China of these countries. And Singapore, of course, is very well positioned with China. Perhaps the greatest tensions in the maritime space have been with Vietnam because they have a claim, the Chinese, over the South China Sea, which impacts Vietnam. It also impacts Malaysia, but Malaysia has been willing to swallow hard and I think not antagonize the Chinese too much. But yeah, I mean, even the Malaysians, Kuala Lumpur has its own concerns about the South China Sea. So yeah, I would say you're right that the larger backdrop, of course, you can sign any number of MOUs. Mr. Modi just signed 4 with Singapore, but MOUs are usually fizzle out. And we all know, as we're part of organizations, that most MOUs are not even actionable very much. But the larger picture, strategic picture, is, of course, the military geopolitical domain. And while nobody wants to utter the word China, that's what the big backdrop inevitably is, particularly, I would say, in Singapore and Vietnam.
I know MOUs, you mentioned any number of them could be signed, but what about trade? It's the fulcrum of any bilateral partnership. Do you think that bit India is getting right in terms of India and ASEAN as a whole?
Well, if you mean by connectivity, you mean India actually helping build infrastructure such as highways and railways and ports and so on in this region, then India's record is not great. Take Myanmar, for instance, even before the virtual civil war there, which makes it impossible now to do very much. Even before that, for 20 years, India had been unable to finish various projects there and to connect up through Myanmar to the Asian highway. So, I think clearly, leaving Myanmar aside, if on the mainland Southeast Asia we can take some things to completion, then that would be quite impressive. The region has got big players here, so India must be prepared for some quite modest gains. Before China and its BRI, the Japanese for 40 years, 50 years were the kings of infrastructure development and connectivity. So India can only play a smaller role, perhaps as it signaled a few years ago with Japan. But again, I think the accent is really on delivering some successes. do something where you can actually deliver in the short to medium term to bring back some sense that India delivers on promises and can make a difference. So that means being selective and pulling together your own domestic agencies and interagency kind of coordination to actually deliver in real time. I think over a number of things, and not just connectivity. There's been disappointment in the region about India's ability to deliver. I mentioned the RCEP, but food exports, promising something one day and then suddenly finding food shortages in India a week, 2 weeks later, and then saying we were embargoing wheat and rice exports, promising to deliver vaccines and then not quite being able to because there was a surge in India. I mean, people understand that, but at the same time, then there are questions about reliability, you see. So I think pick selectively, deliver on something, even in the connectivity domain, to make a real difference.
Indeed. Indeed. Trade connectivity could really be the hallmark of this engagement going forward. Appreciate Professor Bajpai for speaking to me on India Sense.